If you're considering buying a cask of whiskey, the first decision that you're going to be making is basically what sort of cask are you going to be buying? Are you going to be buying a new make cask, a young cask, or a mature cask? And this is the most crucial decision that you're going to be making, and it has an impact from the price that you're going to be paying for the investment to the amount of time that you're going to be holding that investment for. So you really need to get that right. And in this video, I'm going to explain which of those categories you should be buying and which is best for your circumstances. Now, welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name's Mark Littler. I'm a whiskey broker over here in the UK, and on this channel we talk about everything about whiskey collecting, whiskey investment, everything that isn't really whiskey drinking, because you know what, there's a whole host of other really good YouTubers out there talking about that, but nobody talking about all of this sort of stuff. And it's important that you understand this. Casks are a risky investment. You've got to understand that from the outset. And before we jump into the content, you've got to understand my new framework. I'm very proud of it. It's called the PPP framework: price, perspective, and paperwork. Nearly forgot the other one then. Price, perspective, paperwork. Price. If you pay the wrong price for the cask on purchase, you're going to be stung forever. Like, you're never going to be making a profit from that if you're overpaying for that investment for the first instance. So P, pay the right price for it. Second one, perspective. Casks, as you're going to see in this video, they're almost like a generational investment. You can't buy and flip casks. That is just not something that happens. It can happen if you're in the industry and this is your job and you've got thousands of casks to work with, but flipping, it doesn't happen with casks. It's very long term, as you'll see in this video. And then finally, the paperwork. You've got to have that delivery order. The delivery order in the UK, in Scotland, is what transfers the ownership from the person who's selling it to you to yourself. Now, again, a quick extra bonus tip here. If anybody mentions that you need a WOWGR to get a delivery order, they're lying. The WOWGR rules have been abolished. You do not need a WOWGR anymore. You never did need one if you're a private individual anyway. You don't need a WOWGR. You don't need a duty rep. There's plenty of warehouses that will open up accounts for people. So if you're not being offered the delivery order, woo, walk away, people. Right, so let's just jump into this then. So we've mentioned that there's three categories of casks: new make, young casks, and mature casks. Let's just sort of like briefly categorize them so that you understand these. New make, it's your entry level investment between sort of £2,500 for a barrel. There's no point you buying a cask of whiskey that is less than 200 litres in volume, which is typically a barrel. You do not want to be buying an octave, a quarter cask, or a blood tub. Just don't do it. That's not what you're going to want to be doing. So a barrel is the smallest size cask that I would recommend. Obviously then got hogsheads and butts and port pipes and that sort of thing, but a barrel, 200 litres, there you go. New make whiskey is great because it's the lowest price point that you'll get, circa £2,500, unless you go directly to a distillery, because most of the distilleries that are offering casks here, and again, just for perspective here, most of the distillery schemes will charge you between £5,000 and £10,000 for a new make barrel for themselves. If you're buying through a broker like myself, £2,500 a barrel is about the going rate for them. But the problem with barrels is that they require the longest holding period to reach this premium status that we're going to talk about slightly later. Next, you've got young casks, which are between 5 and 10 years of age. They're kind of like the mid-range investment and cost between, let's say, £4,000 and £8,000 for that cask to be 5 to 10 years of age. And again, we're talking about barrels here with full naming rights. Naming rights basically means that you can say it was distilled at that distillery and it's not being sold under a secondary name. Now, for most investors, these younger casks, these 5 to 10-year-old casks, are the sweet spot because you have a reduced holding time to reach that premium status. Again, I'm going to come back to this. And then the final category that we've got are mature casks, which are typically 12 or 10 or 12 years plus, and they can go all the way up to 50, 60 years of age if you really wanted to. It's the highest tier that you can put yourself in, and it carries significant financial risk. Like if you buy a cask of whiskey for 10, 20, 30,000 pounds or something, you could essentially lose all of that. Compare that to a barrel of new make at £2,000, you can see why these mature casks carry the greatest financial risk. However, they take the shortest time to market in terms of or reach their premium status. But of course, the price kind of negates that. So now we're going to move on to like the important part here, and that's kind of like the risk versus the reward analysis. Now, new make the obvious thing that we've not mentioned already about new make is that buying a cask of new make, you're not buying a cask of whiskey. When the product that leaves your favourite distillery's stills is not whiskey, it's ethanol. It takes 3 years and a day for this to become legally Scotch whiskey in the United Kingdom. The rules are such that it needs to be matured for 3 years in a warehouse in Scotland, in an oak barrel, and that's basically it. So those first 3 years, it's not whiskey. You can't bottle it whiskey. If you were going to bottle it, you would call it a spirit drink. Now, of course, that has the lowest financial risk, like 0 to 2,000, well, not 0, 2 to 2,500 pounds, give or take. So the financial risk is very low. The cost is very low, but that comes at a price. The price is the time that you're going to have to hold that cask of whiskey for. And in the next section, I'm going to explain a little bit more on this, but I always say you want to be holding your cask of whiskey until it's at least 18 years of age. That's kind of like a pretty standard formula for a successful cask, whiskey cask investment. You buy it and you hold it until it's 18, and I'll explain that in the next section. And for a bit of industry context here, like look at who's going to drink 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old whiskey, or 0, 1, 2, 3-year-old whiskey? Very few people. At this age, these casks of whiskey have got little interest to those who are bottling them and releasing to the public, so they're just a maturation project. So new make whiskey is the lowest financial risk that you can take, but it has arguably the highest price in terms of the time deficit. Now, if you look at young casks of whiskey, there's a moderate financial risk, I would say. Let's say £4,000 to £8,000 for a cask that's between £5,000 and £10,000. Now, by buying that younger cask of whiskey, let's say that you bought a 6-year-old cask of whiskey. Well, hang on a minute. To take that, yes, it's cost 100% more in price. So it might have cost you 150% more in price. So instead of paying £2,000, you're paying £5,000 for that cask. But you've bypassed 6 years of maturation. So now you've only got to wait 12 years for that cask to get to 18. So the cost has gone up, the physical money cost has gone up, but the price that you're going to be paying in terms of the time that you're holding that cask for has come down. So that's the sweet spot really with these young casks. Now, again, you move on to these mature casks and they are the highest financial risk, but they also need the shortest holding time. And again, like I would only recommend let's say that you buy a 30-year-old cask today. Seriously, like you're paying a lot of money for that. And unless you buying a 30-year-old cask of whiskey is like, whatever price that is, it's the equivalent of somebody who's spending £4,000 or £5,000 on a cask, don't buy it. Only afford what you can afford to lose. Because surely if the person was selling that to you as an investment, well, hang on a minute, all these costs, we know all these casks cost roughly the same time, say a couple of grand. So someone's made all of that margin before you came to it. Whereas if you buy these younger casks, that margin is all yours for the taking. It's not to say that it can't work. You can make some great profits doing this, but it's so risky. I would not recommend it to pretty much anyone. And again, this is kind of like where you really need to understand this 18-year-old holding frame. And again, do not use these figures as a way to justify what your cask of whiskey is worth. I'm using these figures as an example to show you the exponential growth that happens to whiskey between 12 and 25 years of age. And we're going to use one of my favourite brands on this channel, Macallan. The Macallan 12-year-old in the UK is about £70 a bottle. So you've gone from 0 to £70 over a 12-year period of time. It's still pretty much your borderline entry product, that 12-year-old. It's only gone up £70 over 12 years. Now, what's interesting, let's look at these next 6 years between 12 and 18. Well, for the Macallan, and again, don't use these figures, I'm just using them because it makes a nice graph, that is £350 a bottle. So in the 6 years between 12 and 18, the retail value of that stock on bottle format is 400% increase. Now, again, let's go to the Macallan 25-year-old. In just the 7 years from it going from 18 to 25, that's now gone up to over £2,000 a bottle, which represents a 471% increase in value. So overall, the price differentiation for Macallan 12-year-old bottled stock, don't use this to calculate your cask investment, 12 to 25 goes up 2,757%. And that's just in 13 years. And you've gone from 0 to 70 in 12 years, or you can go from 70 to just over £2,000 in 13 years. So this is why this growth is exponential. And Macallan has got a beautiful pricing structure. It's also one of the most expensive ones, but you can look at that across the board. Pretty much every standard single malt distillery in Scotland will have an exponential growth curve of their core range products: 12, 15, 18, 21, 25, 30, 50. The sky's the limit. I'm saying this because this is the point here. If you purchase that £2,000 cask and hold it for 25 years, you're going to see the greatest profit out of everybody. You're going to have waited the longest period of time, but you have seen the most profit. Those younger casks offer this sort of sweet spot of getting in just before they're useful at this point. And then obviously if you're buying a mature cask, you're just jumping in this middle bit here, and it's just risky as hell. So what are my recommendations for you if you're just about to go out there and buy your first cask of whiskey? Right. So for first time investors and pretty much anyone investing, consider two things. How much have you got to spend, and how long can you afford to sit on that money? You can't get out of this investment until the very end. You just can't. You're in deep for this. You wait until the end of it. So if you're on a limited budget, very limited budget, but you want to buy one just for like your grandchild that's being born this year or something like that, go for New Make. New Make is the perfect, super low risk in terms of financial commitment, but it's super high risk in terms of time investment. If you're buying it for your grandchild or your child, it's irrelevant. That time's passing anyway. If you've got a bit more money, that £4,000 to £8,000, those younger casks is the sweet spot in my opinion. You bypass a lot of those early years of maturation. Sure, it comes at a financial cost, but the price is less maturation time. You're waiting less for it to get to 18. And again, like if you're an experienced investor and you want to have a play, sure, go for those mature casks, but do it on your own back and good luck. So there you go. There is the rundown from new make to young casks to old casks and which one is going to be the best for you. Of course, you can visit marklittler.com to learn loads more about this. And if you want to buy a cask, let's talk.